Bringing the international panel, as always, on a Thursday, Sky News contributor Kosha Garda and former Labor MP Michael Danby. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the phone call between President Trump and Zelensky. We're told it lasted about an hour, which is shorter than yesterday's one with Putin. That was about 2 hours. Most significantly, Trump has floated the idea that the US could take ownership of Ukraine's power plants. Michael, of course, there's been a lot of criticism of Trump that he is essentially playing into Putin's hands. What have you made of the discussions over the last week?
Well, like Alexander Downer earlier on the Kenny program, I don't want to be negative about this. I think if they manage to get at least Putin to lay off attacking during the middle of winter Ukraine's power plants, that's at least a development, although he attacked some critical infrastructure 2 hours after the phone call with Trump. Zaporizhzhia is the biggest nuclear power plant on the Geneva River, Caleb, in the whole of Europe, certainly in Ukraine. If the Americans are to take over that and kick the Russians out, who are threatening to blow up the plant every now and then to scare the hell out of the Ukrainians, that would be a good thing. But I fear this whole process will take much longer, and I think Putin is eventually going to annoy Donald Trump into becoming what he and his supporters would denigrate as a neoconservative. You cannot have Ukraine taken over, where 40 million people want to live like Europeans, by a slum state like Putin runs.
And of course, the promise, Kosha, from Trump was that he'd have this done on the first day. Well, we're well past the first day now. I think Michael is right. This is going to drag on for some time because he can't be seen. I mean, he wants to end this war. There's no doubt about that. Trump wants to end this war. But he cannot be seen to be giving too much to Russia, because that would then be a signal to China as well, and on it would go.
Yes, we all know Trump is prone to rhetorical flourish, and one of his lines on the campaign stump was, "Oh yeah, once I'm in, this war will end in 24 hours," is what he said. Clearly that hasn't happened, but it is still early days, and he has definitely shifted the whole dynamic in the chessboard, certainly in the, I should say, almost 60 days compared to what the previous administration, left him with. It is potentially complicated. There are people in his base, actually, which I think is another interesting dynamic worth mentioning, that are also tiring of it and are actually saying, you know what, we should just cut our losses, America, and let them handle it and stop trying to do these deals, the minerals deal or the coal plant deal, etc. But he is trying to basically fashion something that gives some kind of payback for the U.S. and the billions of dollars it spent, recalibrates the relationship with Russia and pulls them away from China to the extent that that is even possible, and eventually getting to peace. So he's sort of operating within that framework, but there are lots of moving pieces here, and I think it's safe to say it's going to take a little bit more time.
We shall see. Let's stick with the White House and the battle between the Trump administration and the judiciary. It's heating up. Take a look.
That the judge in this case is essentially trying to say that the president doesn't have the executive authority to deport foreign terrorists from our American soil. That is an egregious abuse of the bench.
There's even talk, Kosha, amongst some Republicans of impeaching judges. Could that actually be done?
There is a mechanism for it. So Congress has the authority to impeach either the president or judges. It is a very difficult process because the House has to pass articles of impeachment and have a majority vote in favor of it. And then the Senate has to hold a trial. And if convicted, you could remove a judge. Just given the balance of power, slim majorities and margins for Republicans, it is pretty much close to zero, the likelihood of that happening. But they are bringing the papers and trying to shift the narrative at least to go back on offense and actually put the spotlight on some of these judges that are quite activist and political in nature. It runs a spectrum. There's something like 51 cases right now against different things that Trump is doing. It runs a spectrum from things where there is an argument to be made that it needs to be adjudicated, like birthright citizenship on one end of the spectrum, all the way to the other end. There are judges saying you must spend the money that you want to save, or you cannot, as commander-in-chief, even decide who serves in your military, what types of characteristics, etc. So all these things are kind of hurtling towards a constitutional crisis. We're not there yet, but this is all about Article 2, which is presidential power, versus Article 3, judicial power.
We shall watch that one. Michael, Israel stepped up its campaign against Hamas in Gaza. Ground troops have re-entered the centre and the south of the Strip after, of course, you had airstrikes started up again a couple of days ago. It would seem that this ceasefire is well and truly done, or is the objective here to put pressure on Hamas to release the hostages and then somehow we'll be back in a ceasefire again?
Well, they gave them 2 weeks after the first phase of the ceasefire, and Hamas didn't respond to the American insistence that the hostages be released. Despite what the ABC and SBS are broadcasting horror propaganda about civilians being killed every night, this is directed military operation at the Hamas leadership, many of whose names and pictures are published online. Even Matt Doran from the ABC could find them. But the hostages must be released. They're the objective of this military operation. And the context is, Caleb, the Houthis are on the run from the Americans. Hezbollah has collapsed. Assad disappeared from Syria, and the Iranians know they're in the gun. So I think it's completely different time and space for looking at what the Israelis are doing in Gaza.
And of course, Kosher, Trump's ramped up his rhetoric again about unleashing hell, essentially, on Hamas if they don't hand these hostages over. How far could this go?
That is always a risk when things escalate. That is the one thing predictable about these war zones, is that they are unpredictable. Trump seems to prefer either the rhetoric or dropping bombs from afar. He's certainly not shy about that. Again, there's a faction of his base that doesn't like that, but he has done that, just did it recently, did it in the first term. So I think that sort of thing he is more willing and likely to do. If it starts getting into more precision operations, boots on the ground, there's just a lot of resistance to that, and that goes against generally his philosophy as well. So I think we're probably a far way away from that. It'll be more helping Israel diplomatically, militarily, financially, and maybe doing some airstrikes in targeted ways.
Now, Michael, I discussed on Tuesday the story of Kevin Yam. He's an Australian citizen who lived in Hong Kong for about 20 years. He was a democracy activist over there, of course, once the CCP came and took the joint back. He's had a $200,000 bounty put on his head, most likely, of course, by the CCP. And these letters have been sent around Melbourne to people saying, if you know where he is, essentially kidnap him and bring him to us. Well, Yam has written today about this in the 9 papers, saying it shows China's nefarious willingness to stoop to exploiting perceived fissures in multicultural Australia's social fabric. And he's quite right. But this is so brazen, Michael, that a letter, an anonymous letter, or letters, would be sent out of Hong Kong to people in Melbourne saying this man has supposedly committed crimes in Hong Kong. We'll give you 200 grand if you turn him into us.
Oh, I was having dinner with him and an ambassador the other night. He's not a staid, but he's a regular commercial lawyer. I mean, he's no sort of revolutionary bomb thrower, but he supported democracy in Hong Kong. There's an even worse case in your own hometown, Caleb, in Adelaide, where some other democracy activist who's transited to Adelaide has been had letters written to mosques saying that he's supporting Israel and they should arrest him as well. I mean, this is, you used the right word, brazen. This is incredible that a regime like Beijing thinks that they can interfere in Australia and arrest people who are Australian citizens or interfere in our civil life. It's a disgrace. And when even Penny Wong raises objections to this, the Chinese have the chutzpah to say that we're interfering in their internal affairs. People should see this in the context of the Chinese Navy circumnavigating Australia. Despite Albo's talk about our good relations with China, they certainly don't look at it in the same way, and they're pressuring us all the time, including internally with these outrageous activities against good commercial lawyers like Kevin Yam.
Well, at least the handsome boy gets a good reception when he goes to China, eh? Kosher Michael, thank you for your time.